What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now, listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi as I say, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So, come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazde, and boy, do we have an amazing guest. I am so pumped right now. We have Mr. Chris Voss in the house. What's up, Chris?
Darius, thank you for having me on. I'm happy to be on The Greatness Machine.
Oh, man. The Greatness Machine just became a lot greater with Chris Voss here.
Very kind. Very kind.
So good to have you here. So for our listeners who are new to the show, The Greatness Machine, we're really about two things. People who are living their passions and those who are creating greatness in the world and doing so despite the odds. And Chris is neither short of passion nor greatness. Chris, I love to usually tell people, a lot of times I have a little bit of background with our guests, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but we met through a good friend of mine, Dr. Jeff Spencer. So that's actually how we know each other. He introduced me. Jeff
Spencer is one of the great guys on the planet. I really like Jeff.
He's such a stud, and we won't make this show too much about him, but yeah, he's actually coming to Austin where I live and working with some of my people in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, Jeff's a great guy, and he was gracious enough to make an introduction to me and your team. And here we are, man, like almost a year later, doing the Greatness Machine. So what I'd love to do is, in the Greatness Machine, we have we love to hear about people's origin stories, because I think a lot of times people see the end result and they just assume and they say, I want to go there. I want to go do what Chris did. I want to go do something badass. But I always find that people ignore the origins, like how to get started. So I'd love if you told our listeners a little bit of your origin story. How did you get started? How did you get into what you got into? Because you've done a lot of amazing stuff, and actually, forgive me, I just screwed up here. Can I give your formal bio and then we'll go in the origin story? Does that work for you?
Yeah, sure. And you want to cut that thing short because I know it's tedious.
Yeah, I'm gonna run quick. This shows you how pumped I am to have Chris on the show. Listeners will be like, we've never heard Darius screw up. And I'm like, I don't screw up that often, but I screwed up right now because I love this guy's work so much. So Chris is author of Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as if your life depended on it. You're the CEO and founder of the Black Swan Group. You were a former member of the New York City Joint Terrorist Task Force for 14 years, FBI's chief international hostage negotiator from 03 to 07, and you spent 24 years in the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit. I mean, the list goes on to your point. Taught at Harvard, you've taught all over the place, and I actually caught that you went to the Kennedy School at Harvard as well. You got your master's there.
Yeah, I got my master's at the Kennedy School.
Very cool, man. But yeah, look, again, to your point, diving right into it, I would love to hear the origin story. I'm sure, all those accolades and all those amazing jobs are so great, but no one starts there. How did you say it, man? I want to go become a hostage negotiator. I doubt that's how it started, but look, give us kind of the background.
Yeah. And look, I'm a regular guy, and I am a deeply, we're all flawed. I'm a deeply flawed human being. So, which is one of the things that when I was reading one of Tim Ferriss's books a long time ago, he was talking about the ridiculously successful people all got their flaws. To think that you got to be perfect to be successful is just silly. Everybody's got flaws. So I'm originally from a small town in Iowa, blue collar environment. Son of Richard and Joyce Voss, Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Midwestern work ethic. I consider myself very blue collar, which is just kind of, figure it out. You got a task in front of you, figure out how to get it done. And if you see people working, you probably ought to pitch in and help them out. If you, a guest culture, if you will. And I lived in Los Angeles for a number of years. You show up at somebody's house for dinner in LA, you bring a bottle of wine, you sit down and people take care of you. you know, in my house, if you showed up for dinner, you'd be expected to help set the table. That was
Yeah.
you know, and if somebody's cleaning up at the end of the meal, sorry, you know, take out the trash, you know, help out. So my father was an entrepreneur and started, you know, putting his kids to work for him and paying us, but putting us to work for him at an early age, and he'd give us a task and like figure it out.
What was your dad's business?
It was an oil jobber. So he was the middleman between the big oil company and the end user. Okay. Which in Iowa was typically, when it first started out, it was home heating oil for home furnaces that burn fuel oil, and then farms and in small industries, large farms, small industries, and then ultimately, you know, he bought some gas stations, turned them into convenience store gas stations. Entrepreneurial dude, you know, figured it out.
Did you have to work at the gas? Did you have to work at the gas station?
You know, well, the only gas station I actually worked at pumping gas was for a gas station that he distributed gas to. Okay. And I worked there for a little while, but most of my work for him was mostly a lot of maintenance work, a lot of routine maintenance work. Then when I was old enough to drive his fuel oil truck, you know, I started driving a fuel oil truck around. So I learned, you know, I need a chauffeur's driver's license, but not as big as an 18-wheeler. Yeah. So, you know, I learned how to drive stuff. I mean, in Midwestern work ethic, like, for example, very practical approach, you see kids driving tractors. Yeah. Like, you know, we had horses, we put up hay, you know, we cut the hay and baled it. The reason you see like a 9-year-old driving a tractor is because a 9-year-old ain't strong enough to throw the hay bales onto the wagon. You know, dad and older brother are throwing the hay bales. Somebody got to drive the tractor. You know, yeah. You just figure out who's best for the right job. I love it. And that's the environment that I grew up in, which then mid-20s decided I wanted to be in law enforcement. Thought it'd be cool to be a street cop someplace in uniform. Went to Kansas City. Got interested in federal law enforcement. By luck, the FBI was hiring a lot of people. Put in for the FBI. Ended up in New York. Didn't want to go to New York and loved it. Like, it was not interested in New York and just had the best time there. Loved being in New York. And that led from, started out as a SWAT guy, shifted over to hostage negotiation due to injuries. And, you know, I mean, just like one left field thing out of the other, which seemed interesting. And if I have any natural ability, it's that I'm coachable. And that's pretty much it. So when you got in the FBI, you started in law enforcement, and then you end up at the FBI. Was that when you ended up in New York City on the Joint Terrorist Task Force that was through the FBI? Yeah. Got hired with the FBI. They started out in Pittsburgh. Policy at the time was start you out in a medium-sized office away from home. Mm-hmm. So you could get used to being an FBI agent in an environment where, you know, you're not locking up guys you went to high school with. Right, right. Or people aren't asking you for favors based on going to high school with you. So, and then a couple of years there, then they move you on to the big game. And that time it was New York. Well, so what was that like for you making that transition? I guess, I mean, first of all, going from it sounds like you were a beat cop. Is that you were like just a normal street cop? And then uniform patrol in Kansas City, Missouri. So going from there to the FBI, how was that transition for you? Like, was that just like, oh, I'm going to the big leagues? Like, how did you think about that? Well, I've always liked new challenges, you know, new places to live, new things to learn. And it was a lot of fun for me. You know, it was my first move into the Northeast from the Midwest. Started out in Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, pretty solid Northeast town. Yeah. And so, you know, they try to warm you up. They want you to succeed. So they start you out doing easy stuff in the FBI in Pittsburgh. You know, they start you out doing applicant investigations, which is background investigations. You're not chasing criminals. You got to get used to identifying yourself as an FBI agent, gathering information. So that's how they kind of start you out.
Wow, man, that's so interesting. So moving into you're on the job, you get injured, and you move into hostage negotiation. What do you like? Tell us a little bit about that. Like, how did you pick that swim lane? Was it that you had natural abilities? Like, what did it for you there?
Well, first of all, I didn't think it'd be that hard.
Yeah, it's easy, no big deal.
I talk to people. I could talk to terrorists. I talk every day. How hard could it be? My son and I like to joke that one of the unofficial Voss family mottos is, "How hard could it be?"
I love that.
Which isn't far, from what they say is a redneck's famous last words, which is, "Hey, watch this."
That's amazing.
How hard could it be?
Yeah.
And many of the things that look easy, it's because people make them look easy.
Right.
And in fact, they're incredibly complicated. So, I had my knee reconstructed for the second time. I was in SWAT. I was on a SWAT team in Pittsburgh. I was trying out for the FBI's hostage rescue team, which is the FBI's version of the Navy SEALs, and re-injured my knee. And so, and those jobs are additional duties. Like you're by day, you got a day job of being an investigator, then you become a negotiator as an additional duty. I really thought I like crisis response. I like that decisions have to be made in a crisis. Yeah. I'm a very action-oriented person, decision-oriented person. There's a John F. Kennedy quote from way back: "The risks and costs of comfortable inaction are far greater than," and I'm paraphrasing, "to make a mistake now."
Yeah.
Comfortable inaction is the problem. I hate inaction. Crisis response, I still wanted to do it. We had hostage negotiators. They showed up when the SWAT team showed up, and they were always there. I figured it was a simple transition. I was wrong, but I figured it was a simple transition.
So when you got into it, obviously there was a learning curve. What do you think made you such a great hostage negotiator?
Well, it was first, do I take direction and do I take initiative? Two things. I take direction and I take initiative. Now, how did that play out? When I first wanted to join the hostage negotiation team, it's an additional duty and there's a selection process. You put yourself up, and they do or don't select you based on a variety of legitimate criteria. I matched none of those criteria. None, not one.
What were some of those criteria
the criteria was were you a hostage negotiator in a police department? You came from
got it.
Okay. Degree in psychology, any background or education in what effectively is crisis intervention.
Gotcha. Okay.
Those are the most powerful skills. I didn't have any of that. And so got rejected. But then I said there has to be something I could do. And the head of the team in New York said there is. Go volunteer on a suicide hotline. And that was the direction. And also take direction from the right person. Never take advice from somebody you wouldn't trade places with or who hasn't been where you're going. I would have gladly, she was head of the team. I ended up being head of the team before I left New York. So she was somebody worth listening to. So I took direction, and then I took the initiative to go volunteer on a suicide hotline. I had to go out and find one. Had to go do it in my spare time. Didn't have the least clue as to how to locate one, and stumbled on a very good, probably the best possible choice for a crisis hotline at the time, which also happened to be the same one that the head of the team had volunteered on. So, I took direction from the right person, and I took initiative, and that ends up being, 95% of the battle.
So after you did that work, I'm assuming that you had the qualifications that they were looking for to bring you into the negotiation team. How was that? What was that like for you to go into these super high stress situations? And was it just like, hey, here's a process, we follow it? Or was there nuance involved? We're using natural ability? Like, walk us through what that must have been like, especially from someone that hadn't done it before.
Yeah, well, I felt good about it from the very beginning because by the time I went to the FBA's hostage negotiation school, I had been volunteering on a suicide hotline for some time. And as they're playing tapes from actual negotiations in a class, I remember thinking to myself, I've been doing this for a year. I just didn't have a SWAT team outside.
Oh, interesting.
And so I felt that I'd learned the process, and I was very competent in the process and confident in the process. There's the nuances of competence and confidence are really important. Like loud confidence is to be avoided. Like I avoid people that are loudly, boisterously confident. To me, they're making up for lack of competence.
Yeah.
But discovering a good process and becoming competent in the process gives you a quiet confidence because you don't get rattled.
Yeah.
So I was very confident in the process. And the other thing that made me competent in it was after having volunteered on the hotline for a year, I didn't appreciate the perishable nature of emotional intelligence. Like if you're not exercising your emotional intelligence, the Black Swan method is just, the application of emotional intelligence calibrated by neuroscience. It's really effective. If you're not practicing it, it goes away. So how did it go away for me? I'd volunteered on the hotline for a year, and my skills had been slowly eroding because I thought using them all the time was the equivalent of getting better. That would be as if Tiger Woods never went out and practiced. Like Tiger Woods was notorious for constantly practicing.
Right.
He didn't win those tournaments by only playing in tournaments.
Right.
He practiced his tail off when he wasn't in tournaments. And I didn't understand that distinction. So I come up from my 1 year review and I'm horrible. And I thought I did great on the call, and the guy that reviewed me was like, no, that was horrible.
This is at the suicide, or this is in the FBI?
And a suicide hotline.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I had, about the time that things were kicking into gear for me professionally, I then had gotten it pointed out to me that the negotiation skills were highly perishable. And so then I've always worked on maintaining them. To this day, I work on maintaining them.
So can you give us an example of what, if someone's trying to, obviously this is negotiation skill, but you're talking about it from a EQ perspective.
Right.
And I'm going to be going deep on this later in our interview, but what would be an example of ways people could practice for something like that? Or how did you practice for something like that?
Well, there's a thing that we call a cold read, which is reading a person's emotions in a moment. And so, you look at somebody and instead of saying, how are you? You take an emotionally educated guess on how they are based on a look on their face. And then let it be an accurate read. Like if they look upset, look at them and go, looks like you're having a tough day. Now, that doesn't reinforce the negatives. It actually dispels them. Number one, there's been a whole bunch of neuroscience experiments that have been done that have shown that calling out negatives diffuses them. It's the most effective way to get rid of negatives. Not deny them, call them out.
Interesting.
You look like you're having a tough day. Now, number one, it's a great neuroscience move. Number two, you may be the first person that actually saw them and recognized that they were having a tough day. And people are deeply appreciative of that. So whatever you read of the emotion on the person you're seeing, looks like you're deep in thought. Looks like your head is someplace else. Like you see somebody walking down the street at a fast pace, staring at the ground, with a look of concentration on their face. Their mind is elsewhere, and they are working out a problem.
Yeah.
And the cold read would be like, looks like you're really dealing with something right now.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how delighted people are in a moment that you saw them. So that's one of the ways you got to practice, because in a negotiation, you got to read the other person's emotion to figure out where the decisions are going. I mean, vision drives decision and emotion drives vision. What does that mean? Emotion drives decision, good or bad. And if they're negative emotions drawing it, you don't deny them, you call them out. You know, it looks like you're not comfortable with this deal. It looks like something else is on your mind. Looks like, feels like you've got some reluctance here. You know, that's your cold read practices on the grocery store clerk, cashier, will help you do the read in the midst of the business or personal interaction that's going to accelerate you to a positive outcome.
So what I'm hearing you say essentially is meeting people where they're at, right? Trying to figure out where they're at is really one of the cornerstones of negotiation, is because I guess it's because if you don't meet them where they're at, there's friction in the air, or it creates friction, or why is that?
Yeah, well, you know, and it's making them feel like you're meeting them where they're at.
Right.
Like, you know, a lot of people talk about empathy and say it's putting yourself in the other person's shoes. First of all, it's step one, and a better description would be see it through their eyes.
Right.
Because I personally feel the description of putting yourself in their shoes means you got to share their feelings, and you don't. And seeing it through their eyes is just seeing their perspective. But then that's inadequate by itself. You have to demonstrate by articulating what you think they're seeing. So it's kind of a two-stage process. And so meeting them where they're at is to show them that you're trying to see it from their perspective. Show them that you're trying to meet them where they're at. And you don't have to have the same emotion. Like especially I hear all the time, and Jordan Belfort, Wolf of Wall Street, gives this advice. And he doesn't really realize that it's at step 2 of his advice that's really effective. Jordan will say, you know, somebody's really upset, they're angry, so you should speak in the same tone of voice so that they'll feel the two of you are alike. Mm-hmm. And then you should start to bring your tone down. So having met them where they were, you're bringing them down. Like that first part is counterproductive. Like that doesn't help them. The second part, when you start bringing your voice down, that's really productive. And I think Jordan misses that because he was taught the way that I just described, and he used it, and he misread his data and didn't really see that when he started bringing people down, that's when he was really effective.
Interesting. So you know, talking about negotiation, I would love to hear what like the toughest negotiation you've ever been a part of, whether it's business or I'm assuming it's probably not in the business world, but just because you've dealt with people's lives. But what's the toughest negotiation that stands out to you that you've ever been a part of?
Yeah, well, you know, tough. What's your definition of tough? Like for me, a tough negotiation is when the other side, I got a problem with the other side's integrity, which is going to set me off, is, you know, emotions aren't bad for negotiations. Negative emotions are bad.
Right.
Positive emotions are very good for negotiations. So if I want to make a deal with them for whatever strategic reasons, and we don't do this anymore, but I did this a number of years ago because there were tremendous upside to make this deal. But their integrity was bad. And that set me off, which means I'm in a negative frame of mind, which means I'm dumber. And there's Sean Acker, a Harvard psychologist, said you're 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind. I agree with that stat. I think it's solid. What's the flip side of that? By definition, when you're angry, you're dumber. So somebody's rubbing you the wrong way, you're in a bad mood, you're dumber. Right. There's kind of no way around that. So this person was setting me off, and it was making me angry, and I was dumber, and I was having a lot of trouble dealing with the negotiation and the time. So that was tough for me personally because I wasn't at my best.
Yeah, interesting. Speaking about dumb people, in the book Never Split the Difference, you talk about how smart people don't always make the best negotiators.
Yeah.
You know, how does having maybe a curious mind or, you know, being a good listener, you know, benefit you when you're trying to be the best negotiator? Or why did you say that about smart people even to begin with? Yeah,
curious mind, it's a great description. And it tends to not overlap. It's not exclusive. There are plenty of highly educated, highly intelligent people that are curious. But I remember reading an article quite a while ago, like about, it was just as I was getting ready to leave the FBI, which was a while back. And it was the habits of highly effective negotiators. Thought it was a really good article. And he said that people with higher degrees and or highly educated, highly intelligent, they really want to show off their degree. I mean, they worked really hard for that PhD. They want to show off what they learned.
Sure.
Instead of learning in the negotiation. So you're getting them out of the way of being so proud of that degree that they got to show it off for you. You're getting them out of the way of how smart they are, that they got to show it off for you. Because if you're showing off how much you know or how smart you are not learning. Now, curiosity, what you mentioned before, curiosity is a superpower. Like for a whole bunch of reasons. You discover more. You see more. You make better decisions. It's impossible to be angry and curious simultaneously. So if you've got curiosity, still, despite your higher education, then you'll probably be a good negotiator. And I will tell you a great example of this. I listen to Andrew Huberman's podcast all the time. Like Huberman's got the academic credentials as far as anybody's, as the eye could see.
Sure, definitely.
But he's still a very curious dude. He's really interested in the world. And so I listen to his stuff all the time because he has this great curiosity about what works and how do we know it works and what can I rely on because I'm placing bets on my own life. So he's retained his curiosity, and consequently, should he decide to become a negotiator, I think he'd be very good at it. Of course, he might put me out of a job. But,
what the Japanese call it shoshin, the beginner's mind, right? So
there you go. That's exactly
having that
right.
beginner's mind.
Mind is clear.
I love that. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about like just some different experiences I've had with negotiation. And I went through a really big negotiation where I was exiting a company a couple years ago. And one of my friends, he's actually a fellow Harvard grad, just like yourself. He said, Darius, you got to have a BATNA. And I said, what's a BATNA? He said, you got to have a BATNA. And I said, what's a BATNA? He said, BATNA is best alternative to negotiated agreement.
Right.
What's your BATNA? And I was like, shit, man, I don't know what my BATNA is. And so like, it's a term I've started to use because I'm like, it kind of makes sense logically. If I take your deal, I get X, but if Y is better, I can leverage that to, get a better deal off of you because I know that if I don't take your deal, I got this other deal. I'd love to hear how you feel about BATNAs or, how do you use like what do you think about the term BATNA? I guess number one, and then I guess let's take it from there.
All right, so I'm getting ready to sound really disrespectful of my Harvard colleagues. And I studied at Harvard. I taught alongside them. I learned a lot from them, collaborated with them. Happy to continue to collaborate with them this day. Very smart people, a lot of great ideas. Unfortunately, this BATNA nonsense is one of their cornerstone concepts. And a thing that I've seen on a regular basis, especially negotiators from the hostage negotiation world, they go into business negotiation. And my son, even though he wasn't in law enforcement, used to call BATNA, the BS alternative to negotiated agreement. Like the real problem with BATNA, and it's intellectually sound. It's an intellectually sound idea. But human beings are not intellectually sound. We're emotionally driven.
Fair enough.
So if you start out being taught that you need a BATNA, then like you're horrified if you don't have one or a good one. Like you've already you take yourself hostage.
Yeah, I'm screwed. I don't have a better alternative, right?
Right. Now, hostage negotiators, it's a little bit of the equivalent, I think, of walking a tightrope with or without a net. Like if you learn walking a tightrope without a net from the get-go, you're like, all right, I could do this. I learned it without a net. We started at 3 feet off the ground, no net, and we got higher and higher. And like, I'm not rattled that there's no net. But if you learned walking a tightrope with a net, that doesn't change the challenge of walking the tightrope at all.
Right.
At all.
Okay.
But you're going to be scared to step foot on that tightrope if the net ain't down there. Like, I don't know, this is not. But the actual challenge of walking a tightrope and the focus and the concentration and the physical abilities haven't changed one iota. So when I was teaching at Georgetown, we started experimenting with this concept because we had a simulated negotiation, a case written at Harvard, and used our case studies for practice. When I did practice, I'm not if your fundamental basis for practicing negotiations are artificial situations, which is what those Harvard case studies are. They're very limited in their use. You are not ready by practicing fake scenarios. And I use them because there is a place for them. And this was a group negotiation, and each group had a bat net. Like you scored points based on terms, and your bat net, let's say your bat net is 75 points.
Okay.
So if you don't come up with at least 75 points in your terms, then you failed. So what bat net ends up becoming is a goal that you're satisfied once you cross the threshold, which means you're going to leave money on the table.
If you don't have a bat net, or if you do have a bat net, or both.
If you've worked out a bat net, if that's part of your prep, right? What do I do if this doesn't work out? Here's my alternative. That, instead of becoming your safety net, becomes your goal.
Right.
So we started testing this idea. I started raising and lowering the bat net in the exercise. And if I raised the bat nets on the teams, they'd all do better every time. And I thought, again, this is artificial. There was no change whatsoever in their negotiation ability at the exercise. If I switched an artificial construct that does not impact their ability, they do a better job.
Interesting.
And that's the whole. And then we thought about it, and okay, this bat net hasn't become a safety net; it's become a goal. And then people are stop as soon as they reach a goal, they declare success, victory, woohoo! I won, and they leave massive amounts of money on the table. And that's the real problem with bat. Two problems: you're horrified if you don't have one,
right?
And secondly, you quit, you declare victory, and you go home while you're still leaving money on the table.
Oh man, I love that. So I want to tell you a story about when I learned how to negotiate when I was 12 years old, and it was from my dad, my late dad. So the reason I asked you if your dad if you worked at the gas station is because my dad owned gas stations, and I worked at the gas stations. But my dad's from the Middle East, from Iran, and I was in.
That's a long history of negotiators.
Yeah. And so I was graduated 6th grade, and my family went to Mexico. We went to Rosarito, Mexico for the weekend. Stayed in some little dodgy little place, and we're walking around a market, and this guy is selling this kind of this blue leather bag. And he goes to my dad's from Iran, heavy accent, real spicy guy. You'd love him if you met him. And so the guy goes, Senor, would you like to buy my bag? My dad says, how much? And the guy goes, $20. $20. And I remember this thing happened where my dad looks him square in the eye and goes, I give you $1. My dad offered him, and I was horrified. Nice. Chris, I was horrified. I said, holy shit, this guy offered my dad this bag for $20, and my dad told him he'd give him $1.
Nice.
So I remember I was sitting there, and I was really I got anxious. And my dad ends up buying the bag for $6, right? Nice. And I remember looking, and I was like, holy shit, price is artificial. I just remember there was a lesson I learned when I was 12 years old. Nice. And And so I always tell people that story when I talk about negotiation, where I said I learned how to negotiate from my dad. But it was interesting in that his perspective, and I think in negotiation, there's always this like hit him high and offer him low, and then we meet in the middle. I just wanted to tell you that story because that was a really interesting moment in my life, and it taught me a lot. And I've always still kind of felt like it was this like weird game. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this idea of hit them high, hit them low, meet in the middle. Like what are your thoughts about that? Because that's such a thing people talk about so much when it comes to negotiation.
Right. So it's probably going to sound way convoluted. That's bargaining / bartering / haggling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you negotiate really well, you never have to bargain.
Okay.
So there are emotional touch points that have to be hit. I mean, why does that tend to work? Why do people end up doing that? Because both sides feel they've accomplished something. But neither side feels great about it. I mean, you got to be careful about that downward spiral. And that's sort of a bargaining scenario, which is good practice for bargaining. That's a one-off.
Got it.
And the problem is, as soon as you start knocking somebody's price down, it's probably not a one-off negotiation, even if you think it is. Like your dad can get away with that because you're on vacation in Mexico, you're walking through a marketplace. People on either side of that barter, that haggle, they're never going to see each other again.
Right.
Like your dad gets home and that bag wears out, he ain't going back to the vendor.
Right, exactly.
Logistically, it's not there. So you got to be really careful about it. And in Never Split the Difference, we have a bargaining method. It's laid out from the buy side. All the psychological techniques work from the sell side because it's psychological. Calculated moves, coming in at certain percentages. Every one of your changes have to be half the size of the other. Decreasing increments. Like that's the most effective bargaining method out there, bar none. Bar none. And you can get a great price. But what do you do if you beat somebody on price really badly and you turn around, you got to come back to them in a way you didn't anticipate? One of the students in my class at Georgetown used this method, the Black Swan bargaining method. Got a great price at Home Depot on kitchen cabinets. I mean, killed them. And thought, it was essentially a one-off. Well, as it turned out, a couple weeks later, there were some issues with the cabinets and the insulation that had to be addressed. And when he went back in there, they remembered how badly he had skinned them on a price.
Right.
And they extracted every last dime back out of them. So everybody wants to bargain as if it's a one-off. And it's not. And even if it's a one-off with that person, your reputation precedes you wherever you go.
Right.
Do something good, 3 people know about it. Do something bad, 12 people know about it. Like you skin somebody good in a deal, even if you didn't brag about it, and you probably did, the word about you gets around real fast.
Right.
And then the time frames between good deals get longer and longer until they finally go away. Donald Trump, I remember the story, he buys this golf course in California and he's having trouble with the local government bureaucracy, which in California is frequently very challenging. And he wants to make changes in a golf course, and so he can't get the approvals, so he just sends his contractors in, and they start making the changes. And he dares the county to sue him over it. He dares the local officials, you don't like what I'm doing, sue me. Take me to court. We'll fight it out in court. I'll bury you. So he gets his way. What do you think is going to happen if he wants to make another purchase in that same city or county, or even in the state?
Not happening.
Like they know that this is an assertive guy that is going to roll over them if they start the business relationship. So do they fight back? Do they argue? No, it's just they go into this passive aggressive thing where they don't fight him. They just don't deal with him. And he has trouble making deals. Donald Trump had plans for the West Side Railroad yards in Manhattan, had plans when I was there in the 1980s to build this magnificent complex with the tallest building in the world, which is like a cool thing. I mean, Trump's aspirations have always been for grandeur, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
But he had done so many real estate projects in New York at that time, Grand Central Station, Woolman Skating Rink, Trump Tower, a couple of Trump businesses. You know, it was longer and longer periods of time. And before he could get deals with the city, and he needed approvals for the West Side Railroad yards, which is now Chelsea and magnificent.
Yeah.
And every one of the players in New York just refused to approve anything. And he sat on that for years, unable to develop it. Now, it was against the interests of the people that were disagreeing with him to block him, and they didn't care. They get so tired of him rolling over them that they were not going to allow any sort of development to take place there as long as he was involved. Shortly after he finally sells his interest, if you go to that same part of town now, it's magnificent. The development is absolutely magnificent. One of the gems in Manhattan. Great development. That's what happens when you're aggressive and you're assertive and you roll over people and you win these great victories, and they just can't wait to pay you back simply by failing to cooperate.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of fits to what you were talking about before, which is we're emotional creatures, right? So it's purely an emotional response. If logically it makes sense for me to do it, but emotionally I say, for lack of better words, screw you. I'm not doing that deal, right?
Yeah.
I love that. You know, in the book, you have a suggestion during the never split the difference process of negotiation, where when I want to turn down an offer that I don't like, I say, how am I supposed to do that?
Right.
Which I swear I probably have said that 1,000 times since I read the book. I coach people on negotiation. I'm like, listen, if you don't like what they have to offer, just say, how am I supposed to do that? And then shut the hell up. Tell us why you think this is so effective, because I just think that's such an interesting way to, I mean, I love the whole Black Swan approach. I love the never split the difference approach, but yeah, walk us through, like, why is it those words? Why is it that process? Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's probably, there's two phrases in the Black Swan method that are famous because they've been used so much and they work so well. How am I supposed to do that? Or have you given up on X? So yeah, originally, how am I supposed to do that? Originally started out of the first phase of no. Now, what makes that so effective? First of all, it's got to be said in a great tone of voice. So your tone of voice doesn't trigger them. Deferential. There's great power in deference. And then with deference, the how question triggers deep thinking in the other side, which their reaction is more important than their answer. Now, the answer is really good 9 times out of 10, but the reaction is what's important. My son Brandon, who's a brilliant negotiator, he said that how am I supposed to do that triggers forced empathy. It makes them stop and look at you and take into account your position. It's a natural question to ask if it's a really difficult thing to do. Like, it's an inescapable, legitimate question. And then finally, what we've discovered as we continue to evolve the Black Swan method over the years, it's really an implementation question. How questions are principally designed to reveal implementation. How am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to implement that? So it forces the other side to take a look at you and think about, and then compare that with implementation without telling them, like, look, this is difficult. This doesn't fit my situation. This is never going to work. Those are the things that you want to have happen in their head, but that you can't tell them.
Right.
So how am I supposed to do that? What it does is it triggers the thoughts that you need to be in their head. It's just the most effective way to trigger them without telling them, because telling people something is an extremely inefficient way to get a point across.
Oh, I love that, man. Yeah, it makes total sense, right? And especially if this is there's an art of persuasion that's part of this in the negotiation, right? So what I heard you just say is, I can't tell you what to think, but I can plant the seed to make you, I guess, feel empathy, to understand where I'm coming from, to then you question whether you're trying to get this deal done or not, right? If you know that I can't do that, but I didn't tell you that, right? It changes unless you don't care if you get the deal done, right?
Or if you don't care how hard it is on me. And how am I supposed to do that? And I said works 9 times out of 10. One time in 10, the other side's going to throw it right back at you. Like, I don't care, or I don't care what happens to you. I don't care how you do it. Just do it. Or here's how you do it.
Right.
And it's so effective overall that when people get it thrown back at them, they're like, oh my God. And I've had people say this, oh my God, it didn't work. And I said, no, it didn't work. What it did was reveal to you who the other side really was. That they don't care about you. They don't care about your problems. So now you've got a decision to make. You don't like the information you've been given. You know, great negotiation is an information gathering process.
Right.
And you might not like it, but now you know. You know, the information is not always, the news is not always going to be good. But once you get solid news, you're always better off going from wondering to knowing. If you wondered whether or not the person just doesn't care about you at all, you now know.
Right.
Now, you don't like it, but now you know, plus now you don't fantasize about them ever caring about you or this being a great long-term relationship, because the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior. They don't care one iota about you now. That's probably going to be the same way it is in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or 3 years. Now you've got a decision to make for your own long-term survivability. Is this a great long-term partner? No, they're not. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with having a tiger by the tail, as long as you don't think you're holding on to a pussycat.
Yeah, man, this is awesome. I love this, man. I want to transition. So I have a really good friend, probably one of the most successful people I know, owns tons of real estate, owns professional sports teams. I mean, he's a real player, right? And we were having a conversation about negotiation. And he said, you know, I know everyone always says, you know, never make the first offer. He's like, I completely disagree with that. I always make the first offer. And so I said to myself, I said, if I ever talk to Chris, I'm going to ask him this question. What do you think about that? What do you think about the idea of A, never make the first offer, or B, I always make the first offer?
Well, some of it is buy side, sale side issues. What depends upon where your offer's at, and then how you negotiate terms in conjunction with it. You know, so there's some rules on price, RIP, rules involving price. You know, prices don't make deals, but they can kill deals. So if you're an extreme offer person and you're going to say, I always make the first offer, I always anchor high, you're failing to make deals you should have made. Now, there are some really successful people that always make the first offer and always anchor heavy. And those are two separate issues. But extreme terms, whether you go first or second, drives deals from the table that you should have made. Now, I personally hate not making a deal that I should have made. I know it's driving deals from the table. I see it over and over and over again. So but someone can be very successful because they're very competitive, and they're in a position where they can ignore the deals they're not making. But how much time did you put into that deal? What did you pass up? You know, the long-term relationship. How much did that damage you? Again, it's is your offer first? Is an extreme offer? Now, I will tell you that, you know, sometimes, most of the time, sometimes we got to throw a number on the table first. I never drop a number naked, as it were. So I'll do some emotional work with you.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I'll say, like, look, we're expensive. We could have deal with a client, and we're the only ones that teach people how to do this. So they had never seen this move before. Salesperson on the other side of the table, they're buying negotiation training for their sales team. Our head of sales says, we are very, 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 very expensive. Now, the salesperson that she was negotiating with, who was experienced, seasoned, thought he was really good, remembers that moment and says, I would never say that. And 2 days later, we had a deal at our price.
Your team said
we didn't come off our price by one dime.
Your team said that. We said we're very, very, very expensive to them.
Yep.
And they had an emotional trigger to that.
Their emotional trigger was like, that's stupid. I would never say that, because it was an experienced business person on the other side of the table. He's like, I would never say that, ever.
I always say that. Yeah.
If you got to drop a number, don't drop it out there negative. I mean, you got some emotions to deal with the other side. Deactivate them and drop the number.
Yeah, I love that. What so speaking of Black Swan, so obviously you've segued this FBI negotiation expertise into the private sector, and I know we're running
in a very successful way.
Yeah, very, very successful. Tell us about Black Swan. Tell us about who you're working with, what you're doing with that now. Obviously, the book's a huge success, but yeah, I'd love to hear who you guys are working with, what type of work you're doing. A lot of our listeners are probably potential clients, but yeah, would love to have you educate our audience on the work that Black Swan's doing.
We work with people who are curious and ambitious. We work with people that are tired of leaving money on the table. When you're tired of leaving money on the table, you come to the Black Swan Group. When you got a gnawing feeling that you just can't put your finger on it, but you've done enough deals and you just feel like you're leaving money on the table and you don't exactly know why. You got to be trainable. You got to be coachable. Our clients are largely successful entrepreneurs, but we get some successful corporate types. I describe them as the top 1%, the top performers. People are curious and ambitious. They want to do better, but they realize that they got to work at it. And somewhere along the line, they learn that negotiation is a perishable skill. Like if somebody comes up to me and goes like, I'm a great negotiator. I'm like, all right, you stopped learning a long time ago. If you've designated yourself as great, you've begun to atrophy. And it's really easy to take advantage of you, because if you say that, you got a big ego. And I just go like, you are fantastic. Like I'm going to get the upper hand on you. If I flatter the heck out of you, you're going to drop your guard, because it's so emotionally satisfying. You're saying, I'm a great negotiator.
Yeah, you
because you get emotional satisfaction out of it. Your currency is emotional satisfaction. So I'm going to pay you an emotional satisfaction. I'm going to kill you on the terms.
I love it. So when entrepreneurs or high level execs are coming, are they? So let's say they come and they say, hey, I got this really hard deal. I want you guys to consult with me on it, or is it I want you to train me, or you guys walk us through some ways people work with you?
Well, we get both. Usually, frequently, we do a lot of coaching, and we'll coach you through a deal. We won't negotiate on your behalf. We'll coach you through it. Anywhere from 1 to 3 sessions is all you're going to need. And if you're coachable, you're going to use the skills, and you're going to accelerate to the best outcome possible. 2 important terms there: accelerate, which means you're not wasting time.
Yeah. Best
outcome possible. You still may not want that deal. You just need to know what the best possibility was. So accelerate to the best outcome possible. Now, probably in the course of the training, you're going to be like, oh, I don't want to do without this. Like, I need this. Plus, it's a perishable skill. Like, I need to continue to work at it. So many of our coaching clients come to us over specific deals, and they remain long-term clients. Now, where are you in your learning journey? We're going to there's a couple shortcut ways to get you used to our vernacular. Some short, simple, easy ways. And then if you realize that teaching yourself to get better is a really smart thing to do, it's experience and education. It's not just education, and it's not just experience. If you think only one or the other, then you're nowhere near as good as you can be. So, we'll figure out what training online or in person. We got in-person negotiation training sessions. Even the top negotiators. I mean, this is like, you get an immersion day. We do a 2-day training, and we got no shortage of people that night, in the night between the days, will go and cut a great deal because they were so sharp based on an immersion during the day that they solved something that night in a ridiculously creative and solid way. So, top performers, not necessarily entrepreneurs, but mostly.
Oh man, this is so exciting. So, man, I want to learn more. I'm gonna go get coached by you guys. So interesting, man.
Well, it's just a follow up on how people could learn more. How about that? Right, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please. That's where I was going to go. I know we're at the top of the hour here. So yeah, how can people learn more, and how do they connect? Because our listeners are your audience for sure. Yeah,
well, two things. One for free and one really inexpensive. Now, this is assuming that you've read the book. Like the book is a reference manual, and it's an interesting read.
Amazing.
Subscribe. Thank you. Yeah, Tall Ross, brilliant writer.
Awesome, man. Awesome book. It's one of my favorite books of all time, and I read a lot of books.
Everyone
needs to read this book. Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah. So then subscribe to our newsletter. Our newsletter's free. The website, blackswanltd.com, spelled like it sounds. blackswanltd.com. Upper right-hand corner of the homepage is a button that either says the blog or the newsletter. You used to say the blog, we're going to have it changed to the newsletter. Anyway, sign up for the newsletter. Click that. There's a whole catalog of concise articles, actionable. The newsletter's free. When you sign up, you get an email on Tuesday morning with the most recent article. One article, not 10, where you got to make up your mind, but just one. Short, concise, 700-ish words, plus training announcements or event announcements. We got a lot of stuff for free on our website, which will help you get your skill level up. Take one of our courses, or if you like a lot of really great video interaction, like Masterclass, which is an insane deal.
Oh yeah.
My negotiation course, our negotiation course on Masterclass is their number one class. It's the cheapest money you'll ever spend. It's high quality video instruction. Sign up for that.
Oh man, what a gift to have you on the show, to learn from you. I'm so grateful for you to teach our audience and answer all these amazing questions, and to be doing the work you're doing. So listeners, please go check out we'll put it on the show notes too for all the connections for Black Swan. So, but yeah, get the book, go to the website, sign up for the newsletter. I've already done some of that stuff, but I'm going to do even more. And Chris Voss, you the man. Thank you so much for being on the show.
The greatness machine. It was a pleasure to be on. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And listeners, if you love the show, please share it with friends. That's how we learn. We learn from each other. And don't be afraid to give us a review. Mr. Chris Voss, you're the man. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Peace out, you guys. We love you.
You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on, so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers, and after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.